Yeast is a happy accident, writes Emily St. James in her article, How to Bake Bread. It's all around you all the time. It's on the surfaces you touch every day. It's on the packages you get delivered and on the skin of those you come in contact with. It's in the air, and also you can buy it at the supermarket too. Somehow we are enticed by this invisible creature out of the world around us and into our food. It is naturally occurring form. Yeast is a single-cell fungus that pops up everywhere. And if you've seen sourdough starters, you have seen the bubbled, risen, natural way that it's working, that it's gnawing on water and flour and giving off carbon dioxide so that it can grow larger and larger and larger. It's not necessary to have yeast to make good bread, but just hearing the word yeast maybe makes you think of something that is soft, fluffy, golden brown, warm, just ready to be lathered with butter. Whew! I'm getting hungry. Because we're humans, we eat a lot of bread. Bread may make you think of sustenance, wholeness, life. Yeast isn't magic, but it is life. It's literally alive, feeding and growing and making things delicious. And the beauty of yeast is that it comes together with other natural ingredients to create something marvelous. The beauty of yeast is that it's alive and an agent which causes things to rise. Yeast is hungry and yearns to be used. It's all around us, but until it's used as an ingredient, we don't fully notice it. It's on us right now. But until we take notice of the loaf, the scent of bread and the desire to eat, we don't really think about it. And I like to think that for some of us, the thought of bread doesn't make us grumble and complain and unhappy. See, that's not the case for the crowd before us in the text. Jesus has just finished feeding the 5,000, and he has shared a miracle that resembles manna falling from heaven. Yet this does not come to the minds of those in the crowd until Jesus oversteps his place in their mind. And it's his statement that I am the bread of life that gets him in trouble. Jesus in the gospel uses these I am statements that begin with I am and then a symbol to signify his relationship to God. And the name I am refers to the key moment in the Hebrew Bible, specifically Exodus 3, chapter 3, verse 14, when Moses is at the burning bush and asks, who shall I say sent me? And he says, say that I am has sent you. Ehe, asher, ehe. And this phrase can be understood to mean that God is self-existent, eternal, unchanging. It emphasizes that God's absolute being and presence. And in the context of the Hebrew language, the phrase ehe is derived from the verb to be. Thus conveys the idea of God's existence and identity being intrinsically tied to the concept of being itself. This name underscores that God is not defined by anything outside of God's self and is the ultimate source of existence. And believe it or not, it is this I am statement coupled with the bread that just sets them on fire. These symbols serve as a bridge in making it easier to comprehend an idea or a reality that's often challenging to grasp. They convey something to us that is transcendent through something accessible to the senses. Jesus associates himself with bread that becomes an apparent contradiction. That he is bread prompts us to reconsider just a simple imagery because of their anger. How dare you, Jesus, say that you were what rained down in the middle of the wilderness when our ancestors were starving? Oh, come on, you remember the story, don't you? After being rescued from Egypt and then going into the wilderness, the crowd begins to question if God actually even cares, if God is even real, is God even there? So they begin to just hope for death. If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around with pots of meat everywhere and ate all the food we wanted. But you've brought us out to this desert and this wilderness to die, to starve. And no matter how bad Egypt really was, it's so easy for our minds to distort the past. We do that, don't we? When we don't like what the present holds and where the future is leading. We reminisce on the past and can only think of what good ever came. The lashes and beatings didn't matter. The ruined homes and the awful horrors didn't matter. The labor doesn't matter. But I can tell you there was meat everywhere. We had our fill. And Moses, you brought us here to die with no food, no home, and it seems no God. And even though Moses told them that manna would rain down from heaven, they did not believe it. But as soon as the miracle happened, the Israelites they yell out, "What is this? How can this be that bread falls from heaven?" And Jesus, you're telling me that we know your mama is Mary and your daddy is Joseph and they live a block down the road. You're telling me that I'm supposed to believe that you are somehow God? That your presence has been among us even when we didn't notice it, that you've been leading us and directing us through time, that you mean to tell me that God put on skin just to be bothered with we folk right here? Jesus, how dare you? And Jesus is saying yes to all of it. That's exactly what he means. That the memory of manna was such a bridge into learning to trust God, realizing that God will provide. And Jesus is standing in front of them saying, I am the bread of life. I am here so that I can provide, so that you can trust, that you can realize who I am. And since he is the bread from heaven, come and eat and be fulfilled. And just notice the words that are so different in the start of this passage to the end of the passage, where Jesus gives the claim to his flesh. It seems like it's an offensive statement that they will need to eat his flesh and drink his blood. And in the beginning parts of that, it is to eat in a more sophisticated type of way. But as it gets further down, the term to eat changes to the Greek word trogo, which has a connotation to munch or to gnaw, to be noising, eating, to smack on the food. An eating that an animal does. The audibility of the eating, however, is not as important as the urgency of the eating, to be desperate for it. It is eating as though life depends upon it, because it does. We, my friends, are desperate, and our lives depend upon the bread we make, the bread we have, the bread that's in front of us, the bread that is raining down from heaven. Our lives depend upon it. At the start of the pandemic, grocery stores were having shortages of ingredients that seemed slightly surprising. Yeast, flour, sugar, salt. Stores began to put up signs outside saying the things that they did not have: Lysol, toilet paper, yeast, of all things. It became a news headline. What is the world doing with all the yeast that had been sitting on shelves for decades? But it was to break bread, make bread. See, bread baking is a thing we do in crisis. Just notice cultures throughout time have set types of breads that they have made, and it's defined by their story and ways of life, whether it's cornbread, naan, injera. It's born out of, whether it was born out of crisis or out of a desperate need to sustain life. We have learned to create something out of not much. One writer set out to ask the question why so many people turned to baking during the crisis. And she couldn't get one answer. But she says romanticizing of bread is an attempt to create nostalgia for a past that was not as rose-colored as we might imagine. And baking bread is a way to create a nostalgia for the future, to believe that the world will not just come back to life, but somehow will become better. It might inform the future in a sense that what we might take, what we need, and leave behind what we don't. We searched for bread all over to give us what we needed, and when we couldn't find it, we decided to make our own in the middle of a crisis. But I wonder, did we even look for a living bread to fulfill our hunger? If I can take a piece from Will Willimon, yet here we are with God in flesh before us, saying, I am your bread, feed on me. Our hungers are so deep that we are dying of thirst. We are bundles of seemingly needs rushing here and there in vain attempts to appease our emptiness. Our culture is a vast supermarket of desire. And can it be that our bread, our wine, our fulfillment stands before the presence of this crucified, resurrected Jesus? Can it be that many of our desires are, in the eternal scheme of things, meaningless, pointless? Might it be true that He is the bread we need, even though He is rarely the bread we seek? Y'all were hungry. We are desperate, and our lives depends upon it. Upon a living bread, a bread that rains down from heaven, the bread of life. We are hungry in so many different ways. Just taking a step back and looking here in Texas, according to the study shared this summer, Texas now leads the nation in food insecurity, surpassing California. Local food bank officials say that Texas is grappling with a food insecurity rate of 16.4%, equating to nearly 5 million individuals. A significant increase from 2021. Tricia Cunningham, president and CEO of the North Texas Food Bank, states that in the heart of North Texas, where the number of people facing hunger is greater than populations of cities like Seattle and even San Francisco. And the statistic that strikes hardest is nearly 40% of those individuals in need are children. There's a reason why this symbol, this I am bread of life, comes after the feeding of the 5,000, because Jesus knew there are physical needs along with spiritual needs that need to be met, that we are hungry for bread literally and figuratively, and that we, the crowd, the people around us, must take out our bread and begin to share, but also introduce bread that is life-giving and eternal and holy and wholesome in all sorts of ways. Y'all, we are hungry. A world hungry for the church to believe in the bread of life. For too long, we have been complaining and grumbling and trying to act in deep discussion if it's Mary's and Joseph boy, then recognizing the life he is bringing and the fulfillment to a beaten down and hurting world. Though we are approached with the bread, we are still yelling out, what is it like we are in the wilderness? And it's time that we join and live out the ingredients of Christ that issues out pounds of justice, cups of mercy and grace, love by the tablespoons, joy by the ounces, and baked to perfection in an oven of inclusiveness. Y'all, we are hungry. As we are situated in a time of political fear and wonder what just might take place, how the future will change, and the so-ons and so-ons and so-ons. And before us is a God who has rained down their presence like manna and promised to be with us as they were in the past, surely now in the present, and will continue in the future. A God who says that I will reign over you and that I will put in place faith over fear, peace rather than division, compassion against hate, joy rather than conflict. And maybe, just maybe, all of it can come from the same source, my friends, the bread of life. Are you hungry? Because I'm surely ready to eat.